My name is Mulinari. I'm located in Sweden, have born and raised in Argentina and Latin America. I'm a professor in gender studies at the Department of Lund, the University of Lund. Do you want to present yourself, Nora?
Yeah, my name is Nora Räthzel, and I'm a sociology professor emerita at the University of Umeå in Sweden.
And what we are going to try to share with you is our research project and on a very, very symbolic transnational corporation, but experience a very national symbol in Sweden, which is the Volvo company. Maybe one of the first questions to pose is what is the feminist, or what is in our project? Where is the presence of feminist theory in our project? And I really would like to underline that for me to write together with Nora and to do this work together with two other colleagues, and to fight, Nora and me fight a lot when we write, and she thinks I'm wrong, and I think she misses the point, and no, we do that. And really, the privilege of working together and I mean, collectively is something that the Academy really is regulating in order to decrease that privilege. I believe, and we believe as feminists, that collective work is the only work, is one of the most productive strategies to produce relevant knowledge. And I think I could strongly argue that one of the most feminist things in the book we have produced is that we have produced it collectively. And it has taken much more time, and much more tears, but I think it's worth that. And I think to research collectively is a feminist strategy that we should defend in terms of a neoliberal academy. So one of the central contributions to feminist theory is a methodological and theoretical efforts to work collectively. The other, of course, was our concern. We were, you write things or you get involved in researching things because there's something that you feel is wrong, or ooh. And we felt that there was a very big tension between, on the one side, this very Marxist explanation of process of globalisation, most of them that we, of course, had read, and most of them we accepted and agreed. And on the other side, feminist ethnographies on women on the third world. So on the one side, you have all this big macro theory, and on the other side, you had local women and feminist ethnographies. We felt that what feminist theory needed was different ways of thinking about this. On the one side, the macro, the theory, what is called political economy, and the lives of, in this case, women. And maybe that was very arrogant because we didn't know if we could be able to bridge those experiences, but that was the concern we had. And I want and the other concern was, of course, not to write about women, but to put the focus on gender and to understand what is the relationship between the gender and the construction of workers within transnational corporations. So the focus is not on women workers, but the focus is on what kind of gender ideologies, practices, discourses create in specific forms of femininity and masculinity within these transnational corporations. We thought that's the way we enter into feminist theory of labor. ¿Está bien?
Está bien. We want to start with, We want to start with what we call the broader picture, because we're talking about a transnational corporation. Volvo is, I think, number 80, that changes for a while, of the 100 biggest corporations in the world. And perhaps for some of you who don't know, it's not the car producer anymore. The Volvo car is now produced by a Chinese company because it was first sold to Ford, and Ford then sold it to a Chinese company. But Volvo still exists in its large body and as a transnational corporation producing trucks, buses, and big equipment for construction, parts of airplanes, all sorts of things. So this is an image that shows you the connectedness of transnational corporations. And the red dots are those corporations which are most connected in the world. And there is a text for it because I can never remember numbers. So you see 1,318 multinational corporations control 80% of global operating revenue. Of those, 1,318, an even smaller network of 147 super-connected corporations, less than 1% of all 43,060 transnational corporations control 40% of global operating revenue. The top 50 are banking and finance corporations. In short, a small international banking cartel controls a large majority of the global economic system. Well, everybody knows that as a sentence, but I think not all of us perhaps know exactly the numbers and the way in which this is connected. So Volvo is one of these 1% corporations. And of course, they're globalized. I don't go into detail about that. And there is a theory of what that means by Sclair, who says globalizing corporations are those consciously denationalizing their domestic origins in the course of developing genuinely global strategies of operations. And this is a way, just an image to show how this can be connected, how if you take like one plane, for instance, where the different parts come from. That means we are all globally connected and dependent on each other wherever we work. Our point of departure is what we call, in quotes, the normality of capitalism. So why is that? Because there is a lot of absolutely necessary, important research about super-exploitation, maquilladoras, where mainly women are working. There is a lot of research about that, and it's necessary. But we were thinking, like Marx thought we had it from Marx, the idea, what happens when capitalism functions, so to speak, when it's not. The prices are, if they would be in balance, what kind of system is it? So our idea was, what happens with all these happy workers in industrial work, where everybody thinks Volvo is a fantastic company, pays good wages, has good gender relations, has a company culture, energy and passion and respect for the individual. That's their booklet that every Volvo worker in the world gets. And it's very interesting the way in which the workers that we talk to in the companies in Sweden, Mexico, and South Africa and India, they all have this booklet and they use it in a very interesting way to confront the company's politics. So that is our question. What happens in this quote, normal, good, transnational corporation? And more precisely, as Diana has already said, our question was, what happens in the everyday life of workers? And our point of departure is Lefebvre and his idea that in the everyday life although it's routine, it's repetition, but if anything is going to change and transform in societies, it has to be transformed and lived in the everyday life of people, not just in some declarations or in a nice minority commune. It has to have an impact and transform the everyday lives. So what happens in the everyday life of workers in the Volvo company in those different countries that we were able to get a glimpse of is another story how we got into these companies, but I'm not going to tell it because otherwise we would take too much time. So we were in Mexico. The company has 900 workers. We interviewed 27 people inside the company, but in the garden, so where nobody could listen and hear. It was a very interesting constellation. We can talk about it in the discussion if you want to. In South Africa, the plant is small. It's just beginning. It's now much bigger. It had 80 workers, and we talked with 28 of them. And in Sweden, the company in Umeå has 1,300 workers. There we only got in through the trade union, and we did 26 interviews. So our question was, the way Diana formulated it, do transnational corporations have agenda?
Yes. And the other thing we were trying to grasp was the complexity of women's entrance into paid work, whether that was the case for both South Africa and Mexico. Particularly the ways in which paid employment was felt both as exploitation but also as emancipation, or in other ways, the fun of being at work. What we felt, and this is wonderful, I mean, this is not a criticism to feminist identification with the levels of exploitation, but we felt there was a focus on labor as oppression that couldn't explain why people were so happy to be in a work. So we wanted to understand why people were so happy to be at work. Mm-hmm. They were happy. In particular, and this is our material from Mexico. Mexico was beautiful. We met very powerful, very impressive working women that were very, very proud of being able to develop their skills. And we call the gender relations at work at Mexico as a gender struggle, because one of the central tensions in Mexico was women's struggle within the factories to be accepted as workers, and they challenged the sexist representation of them as going to work in order to have a husband. So it was very important. We got all these quotes.
Shall we read them?
Yes, please.
You have to gain the respect of the compañeros. You gain respect due to the way you work. If I put some rouge on my lips, they think that I do not know anything, that I come to the factory to find a man. They believe we got the position because we are maquilladas. As women, we really accomplish what we start with, like in the house. The women come home, get going with the household stuff, and think about tomorrow. We have a rhythm, and the man doesn't.
Mm. So there was a gender struggle on the one side, responding to sexist representation and pathologization of women's presence in the factory. On the other side, there was, in the case of Mexico, we will get back to that later. There was undoubtedly that there was an unhappy, if you want to call that, coalition between neoliberalists and women. The Volvo factory, the transnational corporation offer a place to women that the unions, the male-dominated unions hadn't provided. So there were a lot of, so gender struggle in very complex ways, and a kind of, I don't know, unhappy marriage between women and women workers and neoliberalism, if you want to define that in those terms. We use the concept of gender antagonism in South Africa because the press, I mean, we have the level of fear many of the women workers we spoke to express in relationship to men made the concept of gender antagonist maybe the most correct to define the relationships between women and men in the factory.
Have you read it, or shall I read the quote? Yeah, okay.
Get it
I have a good hand with the trucks when I'm with my friends, and a Volvo truck passes by, I can say, hi, my hands are there, and then they say, ladies cannot do such things. You know how guys are. They said, no, you cannot do that, it is for guys. No, you cannot go for Volvo because Volvo is dealing with cars, with trucks. Why are you saying such a thing? You cannot do a man's job. Maybe, but I try. And then there was a party and I took the photo, so I'm the one that is constructing the thing. Do not tell me that I cannot do it, because I can do it. And here at the plant, they say you cannot do it because it is very heavy. In the line, I tell the guys, let me try. And if I fail, I'll call you. Wait and see. I do it again. I do it stronger. I can do it. And this is what the men say. That's why, you see the antagonism in this. There are women working here also. Most of them, all of them, they're not in the line. So they're doing an easy task. We all know that women are nervous. They can scream when the truck is passing, so that it's just a cry for passing. They're doing well. One of them is in stage 14, which is a heavier one. So she's checking the truck. Do not work so hard. And that is good for them, because in the line, you have to be very fast. So, in a way, we found a good image for the way in which this discussion goes on.
There was a very strong transformation of understandings of masculinity in Mexico that we didn't identify in South Africa. On the other side, what we did was a very strong difference regarding generation. There were a lot of young men taking care of their families in the context of the destruction of most families. But what was central that in Mexico women were accepted even if they were challenged in regard to the possibility of being in the factory due to their search of marriage. That was not the case in South Africa. It was a very strong boundary regarding which places in the factory women were allowed to move to. And this is the third, and inspired by post-colonial theory, and particularly by the representation of third world women and of course the women workers and particularly of patriarchies in other places of the world as much more terrible than the one in the so-called first world. It was very interesting to be in Sweden, which had one of the most sexist languages and very few presence of the women, very few women workers and most of the women workers we spoke to were in now administrative positions. There were very few that were standing in the line, and the argument was that the language was so rough that very few women could manage that. And we speak about subordinated inclusion because what we saw both in South Africa and Mexico was very, very clear and very articulated conflicts regarding sexism. That was not the case in Sweden, which was a much more complementary understanding, and subordinated understanding of the position, the location of women within the factory.
And we called it inclusion because it's such a given that in Sweden you have gender equality, and of course women should work in the factory and they should do all the work exactly like men, it should all be equal, but it is, when you look further and more precisely, you see this kind of subordination, and here are some quotes representing that. I must tell you that the jargon here was terrible. I did not accept to be called names. I pulled a young man against the wall and said, I call you with your name, and I want you to call me by my name. First, I believe that there is more tradition for women to work with painting. This is a woman talking. Of course, there are guys that work there, but it is women that do a wonderful job there. And justering, as it's called today, slipping, it is not so heavy. More relaxing?
Yes.
Yeah. That is why painting has been an easier place for women to get a job. We're speaking history, but there are more women working here than in any other place. So you see that in spite of women working within the production, on the line, there's still a division which is legitimated by women themselves also by saying, okay, this is more appropriate to our capabilities and what we can do.
One of the challenges of this, of the research project was to try to analytically grasp the differences and the similarities of this huge material in very different political, historical, cultural context. And I think we were impressed, and I was very impressed, I was very surprised to find so many similarities, that despite the extreme radical, if you want to use the term radical, differences, these women share the experience of being women workers, and that was, and particularly the experience of all the in-depth interviews that we made show that women, I mean, this kind of unstable position, they move all the time between production and reproduction. That they, another important finding that for the three places, the work in the factory was no pin money. The work on the factory was fundamental, even in Sweden, for the survival of the household and the community. And in the case of Mexico and South Africa, not only of the household, and a very extensive household, particularly in South Africa, but also for the community. So we are not speaking about pin money. This is, I mean, without that job, people die. Women have a lot of responsibilities regarding household and communities that are not regarded, that it's not only care work. And that maybe was the last 2 points, the idea of pleasure. And we know that I mean, queer feminists have provided, and particularly first lesbian feminists and now queer feminists have done wonderful studies regarding sex and pleasure. But we wanted to argue that women use the term pleasure or joy, and they speak a lot about how happy they are and the pleasure of learning things and doing things. And Nora is going to speak about that. Concluding, we, even if we dare to use the concept of queer femininities, because we strongly argue that one of the most transgressing practices today in regard is the position of women workers within industrial factories. there is a strong transgression of notions of femininity and masculinity in the everyday negotiations. So we use a concept queer.
Up for discussion.
Yes.
So the last part is about what Diana was already talking about what we call producer's pride. And as an introduction, we have a quote by Richard Sennett who says, "Craftsmanship names an enduring basic human impulse, the desire to do a job well for its own sake." So, of course, we can anticipate the criticism we get for using that term for industrial work, and even for industrial work that is not very highly qualified, not unqualified either, quite qualified work, but not engineers or anything that we have researched there. But the reason we put it in that kind of provocative way is to emphasize the contradiction that exists in the everyday life of workers, that they are at the same time wage laborers, exploited, overexploited in Mexico, South Africa, and India, and at the same time they are also producing use value, and they enjoy that and they're proud of that. And this is the contradiction with which they live, and we're going to develop a little bit what that means, what Diana already talked about, what this means in a neoliberal context, to live that contradiction. So that's what women said. Labor is an, oh, quatsch, it's not what women said, it's what Marx said. So theory, well, they could have said it. So it's a kind of another theoretical frame that we have here, where Marx says labor is in the first place a process in which both the human being and nature participate. By thus acting on the external world and changing it, she at the same time changes her own nature. She develops her slumbering powers and compels them to act in obedience to her sway. It's a very discussable quote, but we use it in order to, as a lens, to understand the way in which women talk and feel about their work and what it gives them. I think I'll not talk too much about this, about the need of cooperation, because we don't want to talk all morning. So, first example, being chosen. They chose me. They asked me. This is Mexico. I went to a course. It was a course that the company organizes, the company producing the paint. They teach you everything about how to mix the paint. I work in the finishing process, making the details. I paint all the details, finish the product. That was better. I liked it. Yes, I liked that better, painting, polishing, and they gave me a position as painter. I had it during 2.5 years. I was the general assistant, but since 2 months I work in the tool shop. I manage the shop of the protection gear. So you see, on the one hand, the desire to learn and the satisfaction that comes from learning and from doing the job, for being skilled at doing the job. And then at the same time, the subordination under these power relations. She cannot do anything against the fact that she's now just put into another place, and that's it. And that's not one where she can develop these capabilities. A lot that was talked to us about, especially in Mexico, but also then in South Africa, we just read a quote about that, was doing a man's job. Now I also work at home with this. One has to learn everything. I'm very proud that I managed to do this. I'm curious, and I love to see other things. For instance, my parents bought a washing machine, and it didn't work. I took the whole machine apart, piece after piece, and I put it together again, and it functioned. My family admired me. My father couldn't believe it, and my mother said, "None of your brothers could do such a thing." So I love house playing, Kevin, but I've got a business to run. This was also Mexico, so the satisfaction of doing a job that was done by 2 people before. And now I'm doing this all alone. I'm managing alone. This gives me the satisfaction that, yes, I can do this. As women, we really finish what we start with. We are more agile. I already read that. Like in the house, the women come home, get going with the household stuff, and think of tomorrow. We have a rhythm, and the man hasn't. But here comes also the contradiction. I've read that, so I'm not going to read that again. No, here comes another side of that pride. He said that this is perfect. He was surprised, that was the manager. And I learned that I can do any task they give us. I have heard comments about people doing pieces that then couldn't be used. I did not come to prove anything to anyone. I simply know how to do it. And I think this is an important quote and an important position, because what this work does is to give women the possibility to develop a sense of self-estimation, if you can say that in English, that is not dependent on other people's support or on other people's acknowledgement of them, to use the term acknowledging. They can acknowledge themselves because they know that what they've done is useful. So the usefulness is in the thing itself. Of course, the manager said he was surprised, but she wasn't. She knew that she could develop this new tool. But then we come to the contradictions of this. I've been working quite a while, and I'm very interested in advancing. I'm alone now at my workplace, so I look, I ask, I say, teach me. Whenever I have a bit of time, I go and look what they're doing in other places, but they don't want to teach you. Some time ago, I had an experience, and another woman says, they don't teach you because they're afraid you're going to take their jobs away. Heaven, the man taught me everything very well, and then they put him to do something else. And the colleague said, she took your job. He got angry, and I met him in the restaurant, and I tried to explain to him that it was better for him. This way, he didn't get stuck. Now he's also learning something new, but he didn't see it that way. Here you earn it with the sweat of your brow. If it was about using influences, one would do that on a higher level. What they think is, she's a woman, so the boss is helping her. They give her special treatment. Of course, what we see here is, and that was Diana was talking about at the beginning, that is exactly this pride, the fact that women are proud to have come into the line, because most of the women we talked to who were doing these jobs in the line, producing the trucks, had been in the coffee shop before and in the restaurant, they had been serving coffee. So for them, this was a huge way up the ladder. And that way happened because some of the men who were working in that positions before, they went out of the line and became half managers and educators. It's another story that we're not telling here. So what was for the men going up, for the women going what men would perceive as going down, was for them going up in the hierarchy. And of course that could be used in order to make women work more. They work for two people, and they were proud of that, and then get rid of part of the workforce. And therefore, you have a desolidarization among the workforce. It is about 1 or 2 years ago that women are working here. They say the colleagues do not like them. That's not true. What happens is that they wind up people, they get rid of those they don't like and employ women. It's that they fire people and the women gain. But once they're inside, they're respected. They do their work and we do ours. I'm not going through all of this because we're talking too long. So what is important here in these points is that the pleasure that women get out of the work is then used not only to produce a desolidarization between men and women at work and to get rid of workforce and employ double working women instead, but also what we see is that the gender relations that we talked about before, the way in which women have to prove that they're working and not looking for a man and not just having lipsticks and so on, of course produces this kind of need of women to prove all the time that they can work better, that they can work for two people. So it's a double-edged sword. And the fact that the male workforce, the traditional workforce in the line, are not capable of creating a space of solidarity of all men and women in the workplace, but that they exclude and marginalize women and don't respect their work, that of course also produces and increases the contradiction that exists between the fact of enjoying work and being exploited at work. So it has a history. I mean, I'm sure all of you know where this fantastic poster comes from. It comes from the time during the Second World War, where women were put into men's jobs, so to say, and this was a kind of propaganda. And it's used a lot now in feminist circles as a proof of the capability of women, but in fact it was a way to support the war at the time. And as we also know, after the war, all the women had to go back into their households. But still, there is a history of that kind of pride in work. And what we want to say is that, Diana already said it, while the individual lives of these women differ, they have very much in common. And the question is, how can that commonality that women across the globe have, working for the same transnational corporation, within different contexts, but still being exploited and having the desire to work and learn in very similar ways, how can that be used? And it's a question we cannot answer at the moment. It's a question for discussion. How can that be used for a kind of international solidarity, feminist workers' solidarity? There are examples of history as that as well. And the question that we pose in the end is there a perspective also for a kind of solidarity that has existed, however fragile, between women working in industries, women working in agriculture, lesbian women, queer women, in order to organize against this complex knots of contradictions about pleasure, pride, and exploitation, and being complicit in one's own exploitation. Thank you.